We made it out with no time to spare. Larger rocks were flying through the woods with narrow misses. It was no longer small pebbles. These were like small boulders. What in the heck did we come across? Why did the Bigfoot turn on us like that? If any of these rocks had hit us, we'd have been knocked unconscious. What were we too close to? We stopped once the rocks were no longer being thrown, and the woods once again fell silent. What were we too close to, Ashton, and why in the hell did they start throwing small boulders at us? I asked, desperately trying to catch my breath. Ashton gulped down some water and wiped his mouth and face on the bottom of his t-shirt. Obviously, there's something special with this place. We could have been too close to their home, it could have been a birthing site, or they could have had young up there, like in a nursery. We were far into the woods. We had to have stumbled across something like that to get that negative reaction out of them. Generally, they're docile in nature, unless they feel threatened. Connie had sat down on the ground in a clearing of dirt to rest. I felt bad for bringing her on this expedition. This may have entirely diminished her love for nature, hunting, and hiking. I really didn't want that for her. These encounters were a heavy burden to carry. I knew that mentally it was also taxing. "Come in," Marie said over the walkie-talkie. "Are you guys okay? We haven't heard anything from you." John queued up his walkie. "Yeah, we're good. Had some pretty close calls, but right now we're all right. How are things there?" "That's another reason we wanted to contact you," Sabrina said. "There's been some strange noises outside. Screeching, almost like a hawk. But this was no bird I'd ever heard before. It was almost like an imitation." I was hoping the girls would be okay. I knew they wouldn't dare come out, especially now with strange noises outside. But as far as I knew, neither of them knew how to handle a weapon. And even if they did, I don't think they would ever shoot something. That wasn't their nature. "We have to start walking back," Ashton said. "Bigfoot make those imitation calls." I didn't think that Bigfoot would do anything to harm them. But I also didn't think Bigfoot would throw a rock the size of my head at me either. This was all so unpredictable now. The Bigfoot of these woods seemed to be safer than Dogman. Less threatening for sure. Minus the rocks, that is. We would have to leave the area and let everything settle down before we came back during the day to get the trail cameras. As we were walking out, that sound that I never wanted to hear again echoed across the vast openness of the forest of trees. Laughter. What in the hell could be out here, laughing? "That's a damn hyena," John said as we all stood in bewilderment. The sound had carried from the cave where they were standing. Connie just hung her head. "I can't take this. We have Bigfoot, Dogman, and now a hyena?" Ashton paced back and forth. He reminded us of a professor trying to figure out the answer to a long scientific equation. Me and Sabrina saw a Dogman that looked like a hyena. "John, didn't you say that you saw one that looked like a hyena too?" Ashton asked. "I sure did. Through the binoculars that night that Mark shot the black one," John answered. "So, let's reason it from there, because how likely is it that you guys have a hyena roaming around here as well?" Ashton asked. Connie chuckled. "How likely is it that we have two cryptid creatures roaming around here that shouldn't exist?" No way he would be able to argue his way out of that one. The likelihood that any of the three of them would be there should be low, but here we are, in the middle of the woods, chasing two of the three of them. "Are you proposing that the Dogman that looks like a hyena is making that cackling noise?" I asked. Connie stood up from where she was sitting and started walking around. She was stressing. I could see it. I needed to get her back home so she could decompress from the whole situation. We all made our way back down the mountain. The cackle rang out again. Connie never missed a beat. She was a strong hunter, but this was too much. "There's a loud banging sound coming from the back of the house," Marie yelled into the walkie. "Like a baseball bat hitting something metal." John and I looked at each other. "My cattle," I yelled. "It's in the backyard. I've never seen anything metal out there in the woods. That must be what it is." "Hold your positions," John told Marie sternly. "We're nearly there." Ashton took off running ahead of us. Connie followed quickly in his footsteps, and John and I weren't too far behind them. Finally, the exit. We all jumped into the truck and sped off to the house. Connie ran inside to get the details of what had gone on while we were in the woods from Sabrina and Marie, while John, myself, and Ashton cautiously went around to the back. We held our flashlights up as we walked around the side, but we put them away once we saw the lights were on, lighting up the entire area. We checked on the chickens in the coop. They were all accounted for. Then we made our way to the cows. They were fine. We made our way to our pigs, which were fine as well. However, the large metal container we had for their water had huge dents in it. That may have been what was making the noise. But what would come here and do that? Once you step foot in the yard, the lights come on. So they had to have been on when this thing was beating on this container. But where were the girls when this started? We had come into the living room to watch television. Nothing had been happening, so we really didn't see any need to just sit in the kitchen. So we closed the curtains and came in here. Plus, watching television would distract us from what could possibly be going on with you guys, Marie said. Shortly after we came in here, though, Sabrina said, that's when we heard the strange screeching noise. After we talked to you guys on the walkie-talkie, about 10 to 15 minutes had gone by, and that's when we heard the banging noise. We just stayed in the living room and called you guys again. After me and the guys had finished looking everything over outside and making sure that everything was secure with no further damage, we came inside. The girls were all sitting in the living room talking. They went over with us everything they had told Connie and what they had experienced. We also filled them in on what happened in the woods. It laughed? Sabrina asked, surprised. Ashton sat down beside her. Yep, it sure did. You would have thought a person was out there in the woods. Now, I've done some research on wild animals when I was looking up all this stuff with the Dogman. I was trying to understand what their habits may be based off other animals. I had ran across those images of 7 dogmen, and when I found that one that looked like a hyena, I decided to investigate that one further, since I had seen it. In comparison with the actual hyena, this one is obviously much larger, but maintains a lot of the same characteristics. The laugh being something I heard mentioned on one of the encounter stories I'd listened to. If you look at the hyena in the wild, they laugh out of frustration or conflict. I'd say we caused it some frustration by being there. John went on to explain everything that he could remember. I was impressed with John's acquired knowledge of this hyena dogman. We would certainly need all that we could get. I can't wait to get those trail cameras back. Hopefully there's something on there that we can see, and maybe they'll keep these things away from our home. Did you guys find anything out back when you looked around that could have been making that noise we heard? Connie asked. Yeah, we did actually. All the animals are fine. None of the enclosures are damaged. But the water trough we made for the pigs is dented all to hell. That's where the sound was coming from. The lights were all on when we got back there, meaning whatever did this, did it in the full light. This is all our fault, Marie said. If we had stayed in the kitchen or even left the curtains open, we would have seen it. John walked over and sat beside her. Please, it's okay. I would prefer that you didn't see it that close, whether it's a Bigfoot or a Dogman. The main thing is that you guys are all right, the animals are all right, and we all made it back to the house in one piece. The action still didn't add up. Why would something risk being seen just to come and bang on a water trough? Maybe it was some sort of a dominant behavior? Maybe more indicative of a Bigfoot, I would think. Even a younger one, maybe. I don't really think Dogman would do something like that. It would be more in line with the screeching noises as well. Imitations of birds, hawks maybe, possibly the screech of an owl. I know that's a common thing they do. Everything starts to add up the more you think it through, it being a Bigfoot that came through while we were gone. I wonder though, was this behavior the result of us getting too close to whatever that was in the woods? We had talked about all the scenarios for hours, it seems, before we realized how late it had gotten. You guys are welcome to stay the night, Connie said to Ashton and Sabrina. We'll pull out the sofa bed. With all due respect, Sabrina said, I think we're going to stay the night with John and Marie. Connie chuckled. Well, I can certainly understand that one. You've lived through enough when this was your home. They all gathered their things and went back to John and Marie's. Connie and I went to bed shortly after, but I just laid there in the bed, unable to sleep, going over everything we'd seen and experienced since we'd moved there. I was frustrated that this couldn't have been everything she and I had planned for while we were sitting in our apartment in the city. We had so many visions, and none of them included sharing our home or our land with these things. I woke up early the next morning, had a shower, and fixed coffee. I knew that we'd just put those cameras up last night, less than 24 hours ago, but with everything going on while we were there, I wanted to go back so badly and see if there was anything on them. Surely with all the activity, something had to have been stirred up enough to end up in front of one of them. We had cameras all over the places we'd had activity every time we'd been in the woods. I called John and asked him if it would be foolish to go check. All I would need to do is bring the laptop up there to check the SD card. You're a real glutton for punishment, aren't you, Mark? John asked. He wasn't wrong. I was fully vested in these creatures, all of them. I admit, almost obsessed. More importantly, I just wanted to sit outside of our house anytime day or night without feeling or being threatened. I knew that would never happen until this problem was solved. The longer we waited, the longer it would take. And even though I'm a very patient person, my patience was beginning to run thin. Mark, Connie laughed, you can't really think there's something on those cameras already. You know they take a little longer than that. I sighed. I know, but I'm factoring in all the activity we had. The Bigfoot moving around, the Dogman, goodness knows what else. I just feel we need to take a look. Connie sat down beside me and rubbed my shoulder. Give it a few days, yeah? We'll go check them when they've had more time to capture something. We don't know exactly how these creatures operate or their habits. Let's just keep an eye out here at home and see if any of the activity is diminished with the cameras being in the woods. I guess deep down I knew she was right, but the thought still tugged at me. Maybe it was all just wishful thinking on my part that we would have the cameras up for one night and instantly have proof of these beings. Of all the accounts that I'd heard, no one who set cameras out ever caught anything, and the ones that did, the photos were blurry, inconclusive, or said to be a hoax. I knew that even natural animals in the woods didn't go straight to the cameras. So once again, I pushed everything aside and went about my day and started to do the things that I knew needed to be done. The days went by and I thought about what John had told us about the cameras, and it turned out to be right. There hadn't been any activity on our property. The lights hadn't come on. Everything was pretty quiet. I know that generally Connie and I waited for a while to check our cameras, but after a few weeks, I couldn't take it anymore. She and I went out early one morning, took a laptop, our weapons, and some water, and headed to the cameras. Connie was humoring me and going, and truth be told, she probably just wanted to go so I'd finally be quiet about it. We checked the trail cam that was furthest from our property, nearest the cave. We were especially careful not to disturb anything, and we were quiet as humanly possible, so we didn't draw any attention to us by Dogman or Bigfoot. I knelt down, hands shaking with excitement and adrenaline. I just knew that something had to be on this one because this camera was on the tree closest to where we were having all the small boulders thrown at us, and the Dogman chasing us. We saw plenty of deer as we clicked through the photos, but that was all. To say I was defeated would be an understatement, but I knew it was a long shot. We checked all the other trail cameras and finally made it to the water. Last camera, Connie said. Fingers crossed. What we saw on the last trail camera was something we hadn't expected to see. Sure, there were deer, raccoons, the normal things that you would expect to see in the woods. But the last two pictures made us both gasp. It was a man. He was sitting in the dirt, legs crossed, right there where I had shot the Dogman. His back was towards the camera in the first picture we saw, but in the last picture, he turned his face to the camera. It was almost like he knew it was there, even though we tried to make them as inconspicuous as possible. We had a clear shot of his face, though. We saved those two pictures on my cell phone, set everything back up, and went home. We went to John and Marie's to show them the pictures to see if this man was anyone that they knew. No doubt, this was not normal. Why would anyone just go and sit in the woods in the middle of the night? There was a man, John asked. Why would anyone sit in the pitch black in the woods alone? I wonder if they know what's going on, or if they do, why would they put themselves at risk like that? I pulled up the pictures for Marie and John. John, I just thought about something, Connie said. Is there another way into these woods somewhere else other than the entrance that's a couple of miles from our house? She was right. I hadn't heard any other vehicles pass by our house. Of course, it was in the middle of the night, and I don't guess we would have. But it was still a good question. I never thought about there being another way into the woods. As far as I know, it's just by y'all's place, but I also haven't had another reason to look. When Marie and I came here, we were just happy to be here. I never ran across anything while out hunting as far as roads or anything else like that. I never really had to go too far in to get what I needed. Connie and I both looked at each other. I knew what she was thinking. One or both of us would have to stay up to see if anyone passed by to go into the woods. The timestamp on the photo was just before 3 in the morning. The witching hour. Great. Maybe we should talk to Ashton and see if he's ever seen him. If this man is frequenting the woods and assuming there's only one entry and he's passing by our property, maybe they know who he is or have at least seen him walk by, I suggested. John walked to the other room to grab his cell phone to call them. What if it's just a homeless man, Marie asked. That could be a possibility, and I have to admit I didn't think about it as an option. But if that's the case, someone still needs to let him know, in a tactful manner, that these woods aren't safe, and by simply sitting out there, he's putting himself in very grave danger. John walked back into the room before we could finish our conversation. I'm sending Ashton a picture of these photos. He said he didn't recall seeing anyone walk past their house. However, that doesn't mean that he didn't. He said he wouldn't know for sure unless he could see what he looked like. I guess that could possibly work, sending him the photos, but it is a picture of a picture. They don't always turn out well. But nonetheless, it was sent, and now all we could do was wait. But the phone never rang. Instead, Ashton showed up at John and Marie's door about 30 minutes later. We were all surprised to see him and wondering why he didn't just call us. "That's the guy we bought the house from that used to live there," Ashton said as he came in and sat down. He took his phone out and opened up the picture again. I would recognize him anywhere. He's peculiar, a little weird, and definitely has his quirks, but he seemed to be a nice man overall. His name is Henry Webb. He's probably in his 60s, I would say. I don't know why he would have been out in the woods just sitting there. It doesn't make any sense. "Yes, he's the one you were telling us about the other day when the creature stole a chicken, right?" I said. "You said he told you that having animals on the property wasn't a good idea." Ashton shifted in his seat. "That's correct. I bet we have figured out now why that is. There's a Dogman and a Bigfoot on the property, and he knew it." We all looked at one another, and I knew that we had the same question running through our minds. Why would he be sitting out there in the middle of the woods at night, knowing that these cryptid creatures could easily kill him? I knew Ashton said that he was peculiar and he had his quirks and flaws, but that's a little bit much if you ask me. "Do you have any way of getting in touch with him, Ashton?" John asked. "I don't have his number, no," Ashton said disappointedly. "I have no way of getting in touch with him at all, actually. Once he left the property, that was the last time I saw him until you sent me the picture." He seemed relieved to be leaving. Connie had stood up and began pacing. "What has me baffled is I'm sure what has everyone baffled after hearing that. Why? Why did he come back if he was so glad to get rid of this property? And secondly, why is he putting himself in harm's way by just sitting there like that? By the looks of it, he didn't have a care in the world while he was out there. He certainly didn't seem afraid. We have to figure out some way to get his information so we can talk to him and see if we can get answers to those questions." Connie was right. We wouldn't be able to put any of the pieces of the puzzle together without Mr. Henry Webb. The days passed by, however, we couldn't find anything on him. These days, people locked up their contact information good and tight. Landlines were almost non-existent, and he may not even have a cell phone. Some people do, and some don't. That only left two things for us to try. We were going to have to keep an eye out on the trail cameras to try to pick up a pattern, and we would also have to camp out to try to talk to him. The good thing is, he had to come past our house, so there would be no need for us to stay in the woods. We were gearing up to go check the trail cameras early one morning. It had been eerily quiet with no activity on the property. No sounds from the woods, no harassment of our animals, and no wild calls. I was hopeful that the cameras were doing what we had set them out for and that this wasn't a fluke. Connie and I were even able to sit out on the back deck one night and stargaze. She and I opened the door to leave, and there on the porch sat Henry Webb. We were both taken aback. He stood up to greet us and stuck out his hand. "The name's Henry Webb. It's nice to meet you fine folk." "How are you liking this here house?" he said in a strong southern drawl. Henry was stout, maybe 5'10". He had a longer gray beard, but it seemed neatly kempt. He had dark-rimmed glasses and a sideways smile that stretched across his aging face. He looked a lot less scary than he did on the trail camera. I was glad for that. Connie and I glanced at each other in disbelief. How was he here? We had looked for him all over the place. Did we somehow put a shockwave out into the universe to manifest him here? That was silly, I knew, but I didn't know how else to explain it. I shook his hand while oddly staring at him all the while. "Well, you look like you done seen a ghost, boy. Are you okay?" he said as he chuckled. Connie walked over to break the tension. "Yes, we're okay. You just caught us by surprise, that's all. Look, I don't mean to be forward or strange when I say this, but we've been looking all over for you." Henry scratched his balding head. "You've been looking for me? Why is that?" he asked. I was confused. Clearly he had seen the trail cam that took his picture. He looked right at it. He would have had to have known that we had pulled the pictures and questioned why he was on our property in the middle of the night. "Well, Mr. Webb," I began, but he interrupted me. "Mr. Webb was my father. Please call me Henry," he said. I started again. "Henry, we know that you've been on our property. We pulled the pictures and we saw that you were sitting there in a very dangerous place. We were concerned for your safety and also curious as to why you were there late at night. We enlisted the help of our friends in showing them the picture of you so maybe we could figure out who you were and what you were doing there. The man you sold the house to had talked about you in the past. He was the one who identified you." Henry smiled. "Yes, he was a very nice fellow. He had a good-looking family, too. But I warned him about the animals. It's not a good idea, you know. I saw you had way more back there than he did when I came by the other night, so I stopped to give you guys a warning as well." "I'm intrigued, Henry. Do tell." "1, why shouldn't we? And 2, why do you think it's okay to go onto our property and just sit there?" I said, interested in his response. Henry sat back down, and Connie and I joined him. His breath was ragged as he began. "I know you already know, but I'll humor you anyway. I first moved here when I was nearly 25 years of age. My beautiful bride and I shared a lot of memories in this house right here. We raised 2 strapping young men, and I taught them everything I knew about hunting and fishing. It was then we first realized that we were not alone. On one particular hunting trip, the boys and I were trailing a deer, one of the biggest bucks we'd ever seen. I was so proud when my oldest boy shot it. I don't know, I guess this thing smelled it as the deer ran, leaving the scent of blood everywhere. We heard a snarling growl in the distance. We looked everywhere for the deer, hoping that it had fallen somewhere close. The thing is, the growls got closer and louder. I could see him starting to tremble as he recalled this vivid memory from years ago, almost like it had just happened. He was traumatized for sure. I told him he didn't have to go on, but he persisted. We pushed ahead, not willing to let this deer go. It would have given us meat for a good bit. We trudged ahead as the cold wind started to blow harder through the trees. A whistle came from somewhere in the woods, echoing through the valley. We paused in our tracks. The trees began to sway and the growl was moving farther away, but what we saw step out from behind the large oak tree was something we never expected. Bigfoot. As plain as day, I swear on my life. I know how crazy it sounds, but it was there. We saw it. The boys screamed, and I just stood there in shock. The Bigfoot ran back into the woods and disappeared. We saw the deer just then, close to where the Bigfoot was. We hesitantly made our way over to the deer, shaking the whole time. I didn't know if it was going to reach out and grab us or not, but we hadn't heard any movement anywhere. We dragged the deer out of there, but I couldn't get the boys back into the woods after that. Connie and I sighed and told him about our experiences with Bigfoot. Then we asked him about the Dogman. He acknowledged them as well. "So why in the world would you sit out in the woods alone at night, knowing that they're out there?" Connie asked. "Aren't you afraid that they'll attack you? Because surely what we experienced out there is real, and they are predators." Silence filled the air as he searched for the right words. He was only able to stammer out his reply. "I have nothing left. Those woods are where my best memories are. I come out here at night because no one else will be there. I just sit there and reminisce on the good times with my boys. I know I wanted to move out as soon as they were grown up and had their own lives. I didn't want my wife to be around that. That's when I sold the house. But I told that boy not to have animals. And he had too nice a family to experience that too. I didn't tell him the monsters lived here though. 1, he wouldn't have believed me. And 2, he wouldn't have bought the house. I can only assume he didn't listen since he moved as well. I motioned for Connie to call John, and John called Ashton. They arrived at our house shortly after. Ashton and John sat and talked to Henry, and Ashton told Henry of what he had experienced before they moved. Connie came out and brought glasses of iced tea for all of us. "We need to figure out some way to get rid of these awful creatures, Henry. Would you be willing to come help us? Clearly you don't fear them," Connie said. Henry chuckled. "I know you think you can get rid of them, but you can't. The Bigfoot of the woods, they're your only hope. That's what saved me and my boys that day. The Bigfoot whistle. That's how I think I keep them away from me when I go sit in the woods. I whistle. I hear movement, but no growling. I like to think that I call the Bigfoot in for protection. It's like my special power." There's the crazy quirks Ashton was talking about. I was waiting for them to appear. I'm not doubting any of Henry's story, but having Bigfoot powers, that takes it a little far. "Would you be willing to go out with us as a group?" John asked. "We have all the necessary equipment. Stuff I know you never used 40 years ago." As we sat waiting for his reply, a howl came from deep within the trees that shook us all to our core. "Well," Henry said, "I think whatever that was just made up my mind for me. Let's chase this son of a bitch out of here.